Good evening, everyone. I'm Warren Black with All Classical Portland. Glad you could join us tonight. I'm going to have the pleasure, actually, of speaking with Maestro Danzmayr.
Hello, everybody.
So it seems like we have a real feast ahead of us tonight. I was looking over the program, just a fascinating array of pieces, and we start with something very high in calories and high in entertainment value, the piece by Fazil, who I guess we had intended to have here tonight, but
yeah, as it is, just generally common in the entertainment business, things sometimes, there are cancellations, whatever. The idea was that Fazil would come as a soloist and play piano for us, and once we hired him as a pianist, I thought it would be great to also present him as a composer. I like to do these things that I call composer-performer, where you have these multi-talented people who are, in his case he's more known as a pianist. He's a very famous pianist over in Europe, and I think rightfully so. But also writes a lot of pieces that get performed by very of the top orchestras in Europe. And this piece of him, Grand Bazaar, really speaks to the roots of his heritage. I think I told you in other programs that this season has a theme that goes through the season, about heritage, where people are from. And in his case, he is Turkish-German, lives in Germany, but with Turkish roots, which is actually quite common both in Austria and in Germany. We have a good-sized Turkish population in both countries. And as the name already gives away, the Grand Bazaar is a district of Istanbul, where you can buy all kinds of stuff, and a lot of haggling takes place. And so already the title gives away that the piece you will hear immediately from the melodies is very steeped in the tradition of Turkish music themes, but also at the same time a combination, because he uses a pretty regular symphony orchestra. So it's not that you will hear, apart from the percussion, where there is a couple of more traditional Turkish instruments, actually all the other instruments in the orchestra are just the regular instruments that he uses in certain ways, maybe a little bit out of range, to resemble sometimes a little bit more traditional Turkish instruments, but he uses a very regular symphony orchestra for his piece, actually.
I had to listen to it earlier this week. It's very fun. It's kind of an orchestral bouquet. There's a lot going on. It would not be completely out of place in like a Mission Impossible movie or something like that. But it is fun, and there are ups and downs, and it's in a very compact amount of time, too.
I agree very much. So there is two things about it. There is, first of all, it's a little bit of a workout for orchestra, and it was specifically written like that every section gets their fair share of difficult passages. And one thing I would like to point out, because it's very fun to see, I don't know, when you look at the back, there will be the trombones, and they play the notes they have this metal beam that they pull in and out. And so they have some passages that are on the edge of playability. It's very fast, and you see they look like they're in the fitness studio and going on one of these machines. So it's quite interesting that visually even you can really see that the orchestra is a very technical piece for the orchestra, a good showcase to see how good the players of the Oregon Symphony are. So that works very well. The other thing, as you mentioned, with film music, I completely agree with you, right? I think the piece was also very much written in that idea, that he write even the score, that one passage is like a discussion, where a trader and the customer get into a kind of a little bit more heated discussion, and he brings the bassoon and the horns, and for a while, there is this dialogue that gets more and more loud between them, and then it's very clear that some passages are running through this district, or kind of so it is. I think it makes a lot of sense that it reminds a little bit of the film music, because I think it was written with the intention of evoking these pictures for the audience.
Yeah, you run and run, and then you pause for breath, and then you run some more, and that's where we begin tonight. From there, we move to Maurice Ravel, his piano concerto in G major. So Yeah, give us your overview of how that fits into the program.
Yeah, so this program is designed, what binds the pieces in this program together is that every single piece on this program combines different cultural influences, right? I mean, Ravel, for example, I spoke about Fazil with his Turkish and German influence. And Ravel, while a very typical French composer, in his piano concerto, actually, he very deliberately and uses influences from other countries. And in the case of his piano concerto, it's jazz. And then there is also some folklore music from Basque country, which is a province of Spain. So while it's still quite clearly Ravel, and you hear this French, colorful music, also very, very easy to hear immediately, that it's not just French music, that there are influences combined from different cultures. And, I think that's the main, the main theme that goes also for the piano concerto. We have a fantastic pianist called Louis Schwitzgebel, who is really one of the rising stars. And could fill in on very short notice. I want to also point out that if somebody fills in on short notice, I mean, first of all, sure, Ravel Piano Concerto is in the repertoire of most pianists. It's a standard piece, but at the same time, sometimes when you step in, and I know what I'm talking about because I did step in on occasions. Sometimes there is a piece you didn't really plan to have in the season, right? Or you planned to have it 5 months later, and suddenly you kind of have to shift not just your travel schedule, but you have to shift your practice schedule completely around. It sounds like a less of a hassle because you say well, you just add 1 week, but if you have the season planned out a certain week, adding this 1 week with a certain repertoire, it just you have to shift around a lot, in that way. So we are very thankful that he, flew in for this and that we found him. It was a great from Charles Kalmar, our wonderful artistic administrator, who, made sure we get a very, very, very good replacement for Fazil.
And it's a very the expression we use. He's a very up and coming pianist, prize winner, and yeah, he plays. I think his career in the last, when we say in the last years, I mean whatever the last year meant, but well, time means nothing now.
Exactly.
So,
let's take this 1 year that was hard for all arts organizations, out of the calculation. I think his career in the last years really, went stronger and stronger and stronger. So you see the path that, and I think that's really how you see that, how somebody's developing and how somebody's career is going when you look at where were they, 10 years ago, where were they 5 years ago, and where are they now? You see in his case a very, very clear, upward trajectory. He's clearly one of the really younger pianists to watch for.
So, for our information, since you do this a lot, what's it like working with a soloist in a concerto setting like this?
That depends really on the soloist and on the piece. In the case of Louis, it means very, very easy. He's surprisingly calm, a very relaxed person, very, very exciting as a pianist, but when you talk with him, he's just no problem there, no problem this, yes, we can do this, and so very easy to work with. Generally, we would meet on the second day of rehearsal, so in our case that was Thursday. There are 2 rehearsals, morning and afternoon, and then often the concerto gets rehearsed in the afternoon. So that means I do a morning rehearsal and then I meet in the lunch break with the soloist and we go through the piece. We talk a little bit and then he plays for me certain passages, maybe some transitions, in some concertos more and some less. It really depends on the piece, so that I get an idea of how he wants to play the piece and that he gets an idea of what works for me and where we maybe want to adjust a little bit. And then we go into the afternoon rehearsal and use that time to kind of play through the piece and then polish up a couple of corners, see how it works. Again, in the case of the Ravel concerto, the great thing about this concerto is it has a lot of orchestra solos. And so that means that the players know the piece very well. There are a lot of passages that they generally practice. It's part of their routine. Part of these places are audition pieces. So it doesn't take that much work from the conductor's side because a lot of these passages are very well known to the players, right? So it's more about getting the soloist, getting the orchestra, everybody on the same page, fixing a couple of problems, and then you're often good to go.
I'm looking forward to the Ravel piece very much. This is just gorgeous. It's a wonderful contraption of sorts, and then there's just that beautiful middle movement.
It has, I think, one of the most gorgeous second movements. Yeah, it's just it's really interesting because it's really written for it, right? It's not technically very challenging, apart from the English horn player who has one of the biggest solos ever written in the literature. But it's really designed. You can see also in the score, it's really meant to be just a very beautiful and relieving, movement. Very little drama, just like lots of beauty. And then that contrasts well with the last movement that is actually quite short, but fast and a little bit acidic. Kind of like it's a real contrast. You come out of this incredible beauty of the second movement, and kind of like the last movement starts, very kind of like edgy a little bit. So it's very, very, very thoughtful composer, Ravel, as well.
Oh yes, and yeah, and lots of fun. So. And that, I guess, brings us then to, I guess, the main course, if you will. Although, good, it's all wonderful stuff. But the Sibelius, his very first symphony, how does that fit into the overall arc of the program?
So in Sibelius's case, generally he's regarded as the big, star composer of Finland. He's certainly the best composer that Finland had, and rightfully has this kind of like real status as one of the greatest composers of the Romantic era. So it's still, his first symphony is a very, very clear cultural mix. And the reason for this is, or there are several reasons, but one of the reasons is that Finland at that time was a kind of independent Grand Duchy of Russia. So they were part of the Russian Empire, but had a kind of like independent status. Unfortunately, in the time of the writing of the first symphony, which was written 1899, a lot of the liberties, a lot of the freedom was taken away, actually, and they were kind of like a little bit felt suppressed at that time. Nevertheless, for Sibelius, when he was a fairly young composer, of course, some of the biggest influences were, of one hand, Russian music, like Tchaikovsky, and on the other hand, German music, like Wagner. And particularly the influence of the Russian music is extremely clear in his symphony. Up to the structure, like when you look at Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, it starts with a certain theme, very slow and dark in the beginning of the first movement, and then comes back in the beginning of the last movement in a very, very stronger, brighter, full orchestra sound. And this is exactly the same idea in this first symphony of Sibelius. You will hear a very long, very soft clarinet melody at the beginning of the symphony, and that same melody comes back in full power at the beginning of the last movement. So he really was very inspired by this romanticism, this Russian romanticism of Tchaikovsky. On the other hand, now, there is it's one of my favorite symphonies, I have to say, and it's fascinating because it's like you go along a track that seems to be fairly known. You're like, you're not exactly listening to a Tchaikovsky symphony, but you're like, sounds somewhat close to that. And then suddenly it turns a corner and you're in a completely different world, in, some Finnish woods, influenced by Finnish folkloristic music. You hear some folk tunes, you hear all of that. So even in his first symphonies, while it's inspired by, various cultures, it's a clearly Finnish music, and it couldn't have been written by a composer from another country. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating to hear. You can hear some of the later Sibelius in this as well, but it is, there is lots of those, I guess, Tchaikovskyan touches.
I think the later you go with this symphony, the less you hear the Russian-German influence, and the more it becomes very unique Sibelius. And in his first symphony, I would say it's somewhat 50-50 or so, right? It's really very, very, very clear that both influences are there. I think one of the reasons why I love this piece so much is because I like it when, pieces don't follow one clear path, but are kind of like you feel the struggle of the composer, in some ways to create them, and that's clearly there.
I think that's I guess, a commonality with the. But has that in common with the Ravel as well, which tries out a lot of things. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that was really my plan when putting together the program, to really have 3 pieces where you see these different influences on full display, right? Where you really have this idea, okay, these are pieces, every single of them is not just, okay, clearly from this culture, or the composer was clearly borrowing for this, or was clearly firm in his own style, but where always in each of these pieces there is like really mix, of mashing things together. And I think that makes it very fascinating often, these pieces.
Yeah, you think of Sibelius, thinking of Tchaikovsky and all of that, and you think of, I guess, Ravel having visited jazz clubs in Chicago and soaked up kind of the feel of that.
I think that's the clearest influence in this concerto, while it's, like I said, while it's clearly Ravel, but there is I mean, for you as an American audience, it's like a couple of bars into the piece, let's say like half a minute or a minute into the piece, and it's unmistakable, the jazz influence is there.
Yeah, right from that kind of like the slapstick at the part, and it's actually, I was looking at it. It's actually, technically, that's the term for the percussion instrument.
Yes,
at the
that's
beginning.
what you're right.
It's not just a kind of comedy that we have. It's an actual thing. So you'll hear
It's an actual slapstick, yeah.
Yes, you'll hear the crack of that at the beginning, and we're off to the races. So, yeah. Anything else about the program that you'd like to let us know beforehand, or things to listen for, or?
No, I mean, not really. I think in the first half of the program, particularly, what you can really listen out for is like, and that's interesting because one of the pieces is a piano concerto, but how many solos are there in the orchestra, right? Or starting with the Grand Bazaar, like I mentioned, there is this duets and solos and like use of the instruments very virtuosically, but in the Ravel, I think what you can listen out for is like that you have this idea of a piano concerto, and clearly the piano is of course the most important instrument, but there are lots and lots of solos in the orchestra: French horn, English horn, bassoon, trumpet, even on the trombone there are a couple of small solos. So I think that's something in this piano concerto to keep in mind, that while it's a workout for the pianist and the piano is the main instrument, there are is written for piano solo plus a lot of orchestra solos that are there. So that's I think one of the specialities of that concerto.
Yeah, there's a kind of an argument in the first movement. There's a lot of, I guess, crosstalk, but in that third movement, the piano is driving things.
I would say in the third movement the piano is, it's also it's clear because the third movement is the fast movement. So you want to show, I think Ravel wanted to show, it's a very technical movement for the piano. So I didn't want to mean by that, there are lots of solos in the orchestra that the piano part is not extremely hard, right? That's the kind of like funny thing. The pianist gets a real workout. And like you said, I think in the second and the first movement there are the most solos for the orchestra, and in the last movement it's, the piano drives like for 5 minutes pretty much. But even there's like little trumpet fanfare and this and that, so it's even there is some, it's kind of, there is some support for the piano from the orchestra there.
I guess let's see. Did anybody have any questions? Sorry, my glasses are steaming up. All right. So how are you settling in? I know this is your first. Yeah, this is your first season.
This is my first official season.
Again, like time doesn't mean anything of late, but.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like a true feeling. We are nearly in the middle of the season, but I remember the season opening like it was like maybe 2 weeks ago. There is a weird feeling of the time, like the succession of time has kind of a little bit lost the meaning also for an artist. I mean, my season is, luckily I'm very happy it's full. Here, I'm in full swing with my chamber orchestra in Columbus as a guest conductor. There was so far 1 week that was cancelled in the whole season, so I would say I'm on the lucky side very much so. And I think that's also what we want to do as artists. We want to play for the audience. We want to give people something to look forward to and to listen to, some evenings to just enjoy, to get a little bit out of the house and to have like some options how to have a great night out of entertainment. So I think that's really what we want to achieve.
Yeah. One thing occurred to me as I was thinking about the program tonight is just how great it's going to be with the new acoustic system, because there are so many entrances from individual instruments, and you'll really be able to pick those out, I think, especially the harps.
Yeah, generally, I think the whole idea of the acoustic system is just to bring the sound of the orchestra a little bit more into the hall, right? The challenge of this hall without the acoustic system is when you look like how high the ceiling is and how long the balcony over the heads of the audience on the downstairs is, that we had the feeling that before the acoustic system was in, basically many of the seats under the balcony, it was a little bit challenging to get the sound directly enough to the listeners, so you get this effect a little bit like you're listening to a music on the stereo, and you always want to turn the volume, you know, a little bit up, because you want to have a little bit more direct sound. And I think that was the main, the main idea, of making all this renovation and getting the acoustic system in. That the sound doesn't stay on stage somehow, because because the orchestra really plays proper. I mean, the Organ Symphony is really one of the great orchestras of America. So I guess it really should translate into the experience in the hall, that you really get as much from the sound of the orchestra as you can, without obviously making it sound artificial, right? That's the challenge. Yeah, you can always blast the sound out, but that's not the purpose of a live concert. You want to have the feeling that the sound is completely unaffected by any artificiality. You just want to hear a little bit more direct, and that's hopefully the experience that everybody has, that you get a little bit more of this experience there.
Has everyone here been to a concert this season and had a chance to hear? Because it's
people seem to like it. No?
Yes, I think because I know you might expect in the age we live in an age of amplification, and you have the IMAX system that kind of plasters you back to the seat, but it's not like that. I remember in the Mahler at the beginning of the season, I was like shocked by a harp entrance, and I've never been like, I know the harp plays and I've heard the harp before, but it was so clear, but it wasn't like it was being blasted.
That's the whole idea. So I mean, while it is an electronic system, it really, there really is not the purpose of an amplification. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had to build the system, and we could have just put some microphones on stage and just like put it in the speakers, right? And you would artificial. It's more, think of it more like an artificial reverb. Basically, a lot of the acoustic of the hall, the original acoustic, was taken out. You see all of these extra, things that kind of like dampen the sound, so that you kind of like basically take out the acoustic, and then you kind of like add a certain enhanced acoustic in. But what really happens is it's not in the way of, there is these big speakers who kind of like blast the sound out. It's really more a very subtle thing. Yes, while there are kind of like lots of small speakers all over the walls, and like incredible, I think there's hundreds of microphones, of tiny microphones all over in the walls. It really is a very subtle thing. Yeah, it's a very subtle thing that should basically just create an enhanced acoustic of the hall. So it's not an amplification of the orchestra. It's not a kind of like thing where you say like, well, they are cheating a little bit. It doesn't change the balance. It doesn't, change our work that we have to do on stage. It really is meant to make the hall sound, to envelop the audience a little bit more with the natural sound of the orchestra. That's all it does.
Well, you're in for a treat tonight. Thanks again for coming to the pre-concert conversation. I'm Warren Black with All Classical Portland, Maestro Danzmayr.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.